It's the AskJP podcast with jpmorrell. Now, let's start the show. Here's JP.
Welcome, everyone, to the AskJP podcast, where we tackle the issues of the day. With me today, I have my always co-host, the origination of all the positive energy in the J.P. Morrell for At-Large Counsel Office.
The J.P. Morrell Cinematic Universe.
Cinematic Universe. Speaking of which, from the multiverse, we have another new guest star in Mr. James Baker. James,
Happy to be here. Happy to be here. He is now part of the shenanigans. We'll see how long it lasts, if he can hang with Monet and I. And
Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Yes, absolutely. It's good times. Good times.
Yes.
So we decided to do this limited, shorter episode today because there was a very controversial issue that went in front of the council recently. It started, well, let's get a little framing.
Okay.
So for those of you, there was an article that covered a recent council vote regarding a bad B.Z.A. decision from the Board of Zoning Adjustments regarding allowing for hotels with no staff. And we're going to go through a little bit of the history here, how we got to that point. But to accelerate to the end, we're going to do like Memento, go from the back to the front. The council recently passed a motion led by me and Councilmember Harris to do an interim zoning district preventing these hotels with no staff, as well as directing the CPC to go in and kind of revisit what's going on with these weird hotels with no staff. But this was the result of a decision by the B.Z.A. that overruled an old memo that had previously interpreted to prohibit it. And I'm going to go through a little bit of the history real fast because it's kind of it's a lot. I mean, the reason why we're doing this is because obviously in the moment we were doing the right thing. We did the right thing, but as we got more information, it got
Got sticky.
It got sticky. There you go. So hotels and motels are defined in the comprehensive zoning ordinance. So the thing you think of as a hotel is a hotel. It's the place you go, you walk in the lobby, there's someone there checking you in, you go to your room. And it is defined as an establishment providing a private room for sleeping accommodations for a fee with a private bathroom and customary lodging services. This is where it started to get a little interesting. They don't define what customary lodging services are. So customary lodging services is defined in the CZO, includes at minimum dedicated lobby space for check-in, check-out, and staff to assist guests with check-in, check-out. Now, this interpretation is based upon a memo from 2018 from Safety and Permits. The issued zoning interpretation defining customary lodging services, which was not defined in the CZO at the time, is for purposes of use with the comprehensive zoning ordinance. The term customary lodging services shall mean those places that at a minimum provide an interior lobby or office supervised by a person in charge at all hours. Now, this is where it starts to get sticky. So we've been relying upon this memo. It follows the common sense. If someone gets a hotel permit, it's a hotel.
Right.
That memo was created by Mr. Zach Smith, who was the head of safety and permits, but who is now a land use consultant. Now, here's where it gets interesting. So Zach Smith, as head of safety and permits, creates a memo which defines that you have to have a lobby with someone to check people in. He then filed, so Zach Smith, safety and permits person, says X.
Yeah.
7 years later, the same Zach Smith files a motion with B.Z.A. opposing the memo he drafted.
Wow.
And so why the council had to step in is B.Z.A., which shouldn't have done this, considered an appeal of a zoning interpretation. Now, the CZO, the Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance, requires an appeal of a zoning interpretation to be heard within 45 days of its release. B.Z.A. rules appeals taken outside of the 45-day period shall not be considered. However, in this instance, they took up an appeal to a memo from 2018 and 2025.
How are they able to do that, though?
They shouldn't be able to do that. And more importantly, let's not lose the thread.
Yeah.
The person who wrote the memo in 2018 is now the person saying the memo's bad.
Right.
Is it bad because it works against what he's intending to do? Or is it bad in general, though?
It's both. It's bad in that it is an attempt to remove the requirement that you have to have staff, which is required in the memo. But more importantly, it's a person who, when he was in city government, said we should require there be staff there, but who now as a private consultant is now saying, wait a second, now I've got a client who doesn't want to pay for staff, so now the staff shouldn't be required. So it's really kind of a window into, I mean, I know Zach, he's a great guy. He's a great consultant, but it's jarring. It's jarring when you have someone, when they're in government, they say, this is what the right thing is.
Yeah.
But when they're out of government, they go, I know that in 2018 I said this was the right thing to do, but now that I'm in the private sector, I'm rethinking that.
So let me ask you a question. If there is no full-time staff, is this not a hotel and this is more like a commercial Airbnb?
Ding, ding, ding. That's why James is here. He's the everyman. So you're 100% correct.
Okay.
So the city council, Leslie and I, once again, back 2 years ago, 18 months ago, as we were dealing with all the short-term rental issues, we actually told CPC when it came to commercial short-term rentals, you got to go do a study and get that done. So CZ, the CPC, the City Planning Commission, is in the midst of doing that study to come back to us and say, here is how you regulate commercial short-term rentals.
Okay.
We would have done that with the residential, but we were dealing with a federal case, so we had to basically do that kind of like jumping out of a plane without a parachute because the judge gave us 3 months to do it.
Okay.
Not enough time. So CPC is currently studying what to do with commercial short-term rentals.
Okay.
Part of what I think what has occurred in this vacuum where we have locked down commercial short-term rentals is now we have people going out creating hotels, but they don't actually want to be hotels. They want to be commercial short-term rentals. And so hotels are still allowed while CPC is reviewing the rules concerning commercial short-term rentals. So hotels are separate.
Okay.
But what you see right now is them trying to like be a hotel, but really if you don't have any staff in your tiny hotel, you're a commercial short-term rental.
You know what that reminds me of for all the Zoomers that do Uber Eats when you order from like a ghost kitchen?
Yes.
And it's just someone's house, but like you can't go there, but you can still like order from there and like, I mean, it's a very loose metaphor, but
No, it's actually a really good analogy because the thing is that if it were a real kitchen, it would have to go through all the permitting process.
Right.
It would have to go through a health inspection, a fire inspection. It would require all the things a restaurant does. But part of what ghost kitchens are they're like a restaurant, but because Uber and those guys don't really check to see whether it's actually a restaurant, you just kind of list that I'm a restaurant. Or more importantly, I know for like Mr. Beast too, I am old, but I know
he's not
Mr.
allowed
Beast,
on this podcast.
Yes, he's not. But that was kind of the trouble he ran into in that he said he was creating a bunch of hamburger restaurants and none of them actually existed. They're all ghost kitchens. And it was during the COVID epidemic. Basically, you would order a Beast burger from Mr. Beast's restaurant, and there were no restaurants. They were all ghost kitchens. So not to go on that tangent, but so the issue is, so fast forward to now. So Mr. Smith, who wrote the original memo, has filed an appeal of his own memo several years late. And B.Z.A., to be clear, never should have considered it. Because by their own rules, under the CZO, it was beyond 45 days. So,
question. What makes this such a bad thing if that is, in fact, the model that they're going with?
It's a terrible idea because we currently have a ban on commercial short-term rentals.
Okay.
What they're trying to do is circumvent the commercial short-term rental ban.
Okay.
So
And to be clear, I did know that, but I wanted it said so people know what the
Well,
difference
that's why
is.
you're here.
For the
You're
viewers at home.
If the viewers at home. So it's bad because the city is going through a process to see how we're going to regulate commercial short-term rentals. And like you've seen throughout kind of our ongoing battle with Airbnb, rather than wait for us to do things in a way that would allow for them to be regulated, you have an industry that's trying to find loopholes to not be regulated.
Okay.
So obviously it's problematic on a couple levels. One, you've got hotels that pay staff, have housekeepers, have people in the lobby, have concierge, whatever. That is a cost that they take on that also stimulates our economy. Those are jobs.
Correct.
So the other issue, which is kind of underlined, I'll come back to the underlying issue, but it's underlined to all this is if you create an environment where you tell business, we're going to create a model where you could cut staff and still be a hotel, you would have a lot of hotels that might consider saying, well, listen, if I can be a hotel and have less housekeepers, has left people at the desk, or have no people at the desk at all, you create an environment where all hotels could transition to this model, which would lead a whole lot of people to not have jobs.
That's true.
And
That's true.
and also it creates an environment where you really undermine what a hotel is. But getting back to basically B.Z.A. makes this horrific opinion and puts the council in a position where, working with safety and permits, we have to figure out what we're going to do in the interim. So the first thing my office did, what we did, is we reached out to the director of safety and permits and said, hey, part of the B.Z.A.'s rationale as to why the Zach Smith opinion was bad is that it was old and the law had changed a couple of times. So first thing I want you to do, director of safety and permits, is give us a new opinion based on the current law. Now, we're going to have some video at the end of the thing. I think Monday's going to patch in the actual council debate on this. But what Mr. Smith and his clients tried to do was to argue that because the council asked them to give a new interpretation, that we were agreeing with Mr. Smith and his client that the old interpretation was bad. And that was absolutely not the case. The old interpretation was fine.
It just got overturned.
It just got overturned, so we said, go give us a new one. We were not commenting, and I had to go correct it in the meeting. They were trying to make an argument that the fact that council stepped in meant that they were right. We don't think they were right. We don't think B.Z.A. should have took it up. But regardless of the fact that B.Z.A. took it up, we had to take measures to get the law back where it needed to be.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. Under residential Airbnbs, isn't there supposed to be someone at the house always?
Well, there's supposed to be someone who's responsible, but
Okay.
we don't want to conflate the two because that's a whole different podcast.
Okay.
So we're just talking about commercial.
That's
right
a whole
now.
series.
That's a whole series.
No, I
So
was asking because if that rule was in place for residential, just someone competent on grounds.
you're right in that commercials would have less regulation than residentials.
Correct.
You're so to James's point, if we had allowed this to stand, it would have made it more shady and easier to run a commercial
thinking.
than to do anything with residential. So in response to this bad decision, my office requested a new interpretation based upon B.Z.A.'s bad ruling. They created a new memo. That memo unequivocally states personal staff must be present at all times. And beyond that, because we want to close this loophole permanently, we have authored a text amendment that clarifies the definition of customary lodging in the CZO to include staffing of 24/7 and to avoid exploitation of future appeals or legal loopholes. Because the reality is this. What's really frustrating in the situation is that every single person in the podcast verse, the podcast multiverse, in the city of New Orleans, in the United States, when you go to a hotel, you assume there's a lobby, a front desk, and someone to check you in. Hotels differ, long-term, short-term. Do they do maid service every day? Do they do it once a week? All that stuff's variable. But when you walk through that door, there's somebody checking you in.
Right.
At least one.
At least one. At least one. It could be one person checking you in. I say this all the time, and it's kind of frustrating, but the council constantly has to legislate common sense. If you want to open a hotel, there's an assumption you have to have someone in the lobby.
Right.
But we're doing a text amendment to clarify common sense.
Let's also clarify that we're not saying that the people involved are not using common sense. What they're trying to do is find a loophole in the system.
So
I'm not saying we don't have it. Let me try
no,
it.
You're right. Let me be clear. I don't think the people that were doing this legitimately misunderstood the law. They found a loophole where they were trying to exploit the law to have commercial short-term rentals in a pretend hotel.
Right.
So we have authored a text amendment which is going to close all legal loopholes, legislate common sense, and then we dropped an interim zoning district, both Councilmember Harris and I, that prohibits Department of Safety and Permits from issuing hotel motel permits without 24/7 staffing. And the reason why we dropped the interim zoning district is that doing a text amendment to the comprehensive zoning ordinance takes 6 to 8 months. So if we could have done it quickly, we wouldn't have needed an IZD, but we know that as they're doing the text amendment, people will continue to try and exploit the loophole.
Right.
So the IZD shuts the door on that happening. Just shuts it down. And I am also co-authoring an ordinance separately by Councilmember Harris, she's leading, that adds a 24/7 staffing requirement as part of an occupational license requirement for a hotel motel. So that's going to create a different requirement outside of zoning that says if you want a permit to be a hotel, an occupational permit, you also got to commit to 24/7 staffing. So, I mean, I think we've shut that door pretty hard, but the reason why we're here on this podcast today talking about it is the coverage wasn't great. I don't think they did a really good job explaining kind of like how significant the B.Z.A. bad ruling was, how it could have opened the door to literally people buying up gas stations, throwing 3 beds in them and saying, I am now a hotel. Because the reality is once you remove the requirement for a lobby or for staff in that lobby, you can call every large house a hotel at that point.
Or at least a bed and breakfast.
Well, bed and breakfast requires the person to be on site too.
Okay.
So it actually would make it more beneficial and more profitable to just be a no staff hotel than to be a bed and breakfast. Or to your point, James, it would make it less onerous to be a commercial short-term rental fake hotel than to be a residential short-term rental.
This is true.
So with the ordinance, we're taking the safety and permits interpretation or their interpretation of the law, and now we're putting it in ordinance so that there's no interpretation.
Correct. So basically what we're doing is the new interpretation is nearly identical to Mr. Smith's original interpretation.
But it's being codified.
But we're also going to take that opinion, codify it both in the law in regards to zoning, but then go a step further and make it a requirement of occupational permits for hotels, which gives you 2 bites at the apple where you have 2 different departments, 2 different requirements where the party getting the hotel permit knows there's a zoning requirement, and we also are going to issue an occupational permit to operate as a hotel without confirming you've got 24-hour staffing.
Okay.
So, I mean, and I think it's important that when you talk about hotels and staffing, it's more than just expectations. Because obviously you expect there to be someone staffing a hotel. It's also about safety, because part of having that person at the lobby of that hotel is that when you check in, you're under the assumption, A, someone's going to be there if something goes wrong.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, we have a huge problem right now in the city when it comes to residential short-term rentals with house parties, where people rent out a house to someone. That person then has it for a house party, and bad things happen.
There was a shooting in Mid-City, like, a couple months ago?
A couple of months ago.
There was a shooting in Bywater. There was 2 19-year-olds who were wounded in the lower 9 during a party in a whole house rental.
A few years ago, there was one in the warehouse district.
So we already have this problem with residential, but residential, we've at least created an entire operating scheme from a year and a half ago that gives us clear parameters from yanking those permits and dealing with that.
Right.
And all of these problems happened before we changed the NSTR residential short-term rental law. The commercial short-term rental law is in flux because CPC is dealing with it.
Okay.
The worst thing that could have happened is for something like this, to a bad B.Z.A. opinion to come down, people to now have the ability to rent out whole hotels, these small hotels with 2, 3, 4 bedrooms, and have no staff there, and basically do the same thing. But it's a hotel, not with a residential short-term rental. The city revoking a permit is very, very, very easy. If you have a hotel permit and you're operating under the law of your hotel motel permit, we can't shut those down very easily if they go bad. So part of the reason why the council reacted so quickly and so viscerally to it is that we saw not only was it a bad interpretation, anti-common sense, and problematic, it could have almost immediate public safety concerns, because you would have basically an environment where we're creating legal, multi-large, whole home, whole hotel rentals with nobody on site.
Yeah. I ain't doing that.
I mean, I don't think any of us would do it, but I think there are plenty of bachelor parties and bachelorette parties that would.
Yeah.
And I mean, the other issue, now that I'm thinking about it, when you're talking about hotels versus NSTRs, with all of those house parties where bad things happened, there's no requirement. A lot of these NSTRs have lock boxes and things.
Right.
There's no confirmation the person who's checking in is the right person.
This is correct as well.
Part of the other thing with a hotel is that if you're a hotel guy in a hotel and a bunch of 14, 15, 16-year-old up saying, I'm here to rent a room, they're going to say, no, you're not.
And they say, where's your ID?
Where's your ID and all that stuff. When you talk about lobbyless hotels that are basically commercial short-term rentals, there's no one checking to make sure the people checking in are the actual people, are of age, or are supervised.
This is true.
So another reason why hotels require you to have somebody to check you in.
I just feel like that's such like a trend with technology recently. Like we saw, sorry, my voice is cracking. With the January 1st attack, with the whole Turo car rental, it's like we're just making it way too easy.
Well, I mean, okay, so everybody, just so you weren't following, so with the January 1st attacker rented his vehicle. So did the guy who blew himself up at the Trump Hotel.
Oh, okay.
They both rented their cars through Turo. Now, in a traditional rental of a regular car at the airport, you have to show up, you have to have your ID. There's a whole process.
Right.
Turo is kind of the Airbnb of cars. So basically, their position, like Airbnb, is they facilitate two people meeting each other to rent a car.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes it very easy for individuals to rent cars. And there is a certain amount of like egalitarian, like, let the free market reign. But in the same token, it makes it much harder for people to catch bad actors who might be doing bad things when you don't have any regulation. So it's like, it's not so much, I think, an issue of should a Turo exist. Right. It's more like, are the people operating Turo doing the bare minimum to make sure that the people who are doing these rentals aren't doing the wrong thing?
Correct.
It's sort of like when you do with Uber, like a lot of people give Uber pushback because they do bad background checks, and it's like, well, no one's saying Uber shouldn't exist, but you should do a background check to make sure the person picking up your daughter or your brother or your son or your grandparents isn't like a,
serial
killer, a child molester, or the like. Like, there are expectations people have, and it goes back to the common sense argument. You would think, since like Airbnb, Turo, whatever the heck these guys were, that since they have so much money, their inclination is to do the right thing, and it's the opposite. The inclination is to do as little as possible and make as much money as possible. And as cheap as a background check is, doing millions of background checks, having that driver have to wait 3 days to get the background check back, that's time and money. So they'd rather not have to deal with that. And
this is true.
So, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, as a council member with my staff, the environment's constantly changing. It's very fluid, and we have to adapt with it. But we wanted to touch on this one in particular because it was such a bizarre, weird, only in New Orleans kind of drama of the former head of safety and permits who authored a memo shows up years later to invalidate his own memo. And procedurally, I'm not saying his arguments were necessarily bad.
Right.
But
it was just odd.
it was also kind of disingenuous.
Yeah.
Because if you thought when you were in government this was important,
Right.
and then you leave and you directly contradict where you were later on because you're in the private sector, I'm not saying what he did wasn't good for his client and wasn't legal, him making these arguments. It's just jarring as a elected official, someone in government who's like, whoa, this just seems very odd.
Yeah.
And it just created an environment where it's almost like the best person to hire to go after government is always the person who used to be in government.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason why people leave the government sector to go to the private sector to make a bunch of money. So, I mean, whoever hired Zach, they hired a good person to go after the situation.
Absolutely, they did.
Yeah, but I mean, it just creates an environment where we have to be on our toes, and I want to particularly call out, I particularly want to note that what's very disconcerting is that every single board in the city of New Orleans has a city attorney assigned to them. That city attorney should have advised B.Z.A. they couldn't take this appeal.
We could do a whole other podcast episode on the city attorney.
We can, but on a very just because I want to give the B.Z.A. a little bit. There are, as my understanding right now, currently there are no attorneys on the B.Z.A. board currently. None of the people representing are attorneys. So, and I know from looking back at the meeting, a lot of the B.Z.A. kept looking toward the city attorney saying, well, can we or can't we do this? A lot of arguments are being made. Silence. The city attorney's job is to catch the fact that this appeal never should have happened. Because, as stated previously from the top of the episode, you have 45 days from when the Director of Safety and Permits, Department of Safety and Permits, issues an opinion to challenge the opinion, because the opinion's published. This memo from 2018 is publicly available.
Yeah.
There was 45 days after that memo was in 2018 to appeal it. No one did. So it became the presiding memorandum.
Yeah.
The moment that it was passed, someone, probably not Zach because he was still in government, should have appealed it. Even using the argument that some change to the law later on would have necessitated an appeal, we changed the the residential short-term rental law 18 months ago or 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Any version of this argument would have said this never should have been before B.Z.A.
Right.
And the city attorney who was doing that committee did not do their job. And because they didn't do their job, because B.Z.A. made a bad decision, it required the council in a very quick turnaround to kind of stop the commercial short-term rental staffless hotel apocalypse.
Yeah.
You know?
Our legislative director, Julia, when she saw that, she was like, shit, we need to make sure.
Well, and I mean, and we have Julia, Ashley Becknell, who used to be over safety and permits,
Yeah.
over NSTRs and,
Right.
and commercial STRs, now works for the council. We have a great, A team of staff who was on this, but on the same token, it's very frustrating when government makes other government hard.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like we should all be pulling in the same direction, and I'm glad we were able to step in quickly and kind of put the Band-Aid on the gunshot wound. And I mean, like I said, safety and permits is working with every other department, with the city planning commission, who's doing a massive relook at all the, not just commercial short-term rentals, but really customary lodging in general, because there used to be a lot of updates in the law for hotels, for bed and breakfasts and the like, and to make it a little more sane. But to kind of take advantage of that chaos to try and sneak in hotels with iPads at the entrance or whatever it was going to be, it's not what's best for the city.
And
No.
people only do what you allow them to do,
Amen.
and they only try what you allow them to try.
You're right.
So I mean that's why there's checks and balances in government to begin with.
Yeah, and this is one instance in which we can say unequivocally government worked, because once government collectively noticed that this bad thing was going to happen, everyone, both from the executive side and safety and permits, everyone identified very quickly this is a problem that had to be resolved.
Yeah.
We all pulled in the same direction. We all slammed that door shut. And I mean, Monet's going to attach the exchange during the council meeting, but it was really bizarre when we were trying to back up safety and permits to solve this problem, how both Mr. Smith and the attorney representing the people trying to juke the law tried to argue that us stepping in proved their point, and I had to shut them down and say, no. We're not saying they were wrong. They were right. But because you used a loophole that we had to close, we had to double down on them being right. Mm-hmm. So Monet's going to touch at the end of this episode for those of you who are watching on the video land, because it probably won't translate too well to audio, but it might. But really the exchange, because I was very incredulous that they were trying to say, because the council had to fix the problem, the people that created the problem were somehow correct in their bad argument. Yeah. I think that's a good place to end it.
Do you have any?
I do want to give a shout out to Baldwin and Company, where we are doing the podcast today. Absolutely. They have tremendous facilities.
Yeah, shout out. This room's noise.
This room is I mean,
it's noise.
Shout out, DJ.
DJ, we will probably be back here again after we deal with the host of people after the Stein episode that now think we shoot on location. So
this is correct.
We have a lot of people who are like, we want you to come to our restaurant or come to our bar. Now, mind you,
depends on how good the food is.
Good,
I mean,
if the food is good, the drinks are good, maybe we'll all come there. But I think for the near future, for our next couple of podcasts, when we're not doing on location, this might be the spot we're doing it from. So I want to shout out to DJ, to Baldwin and Company. The place is fantastic.
And shout out to me for figuring out all this stuff.
Shout out to Monet, because the fact we even have a multi-camera setup,
this stressed me,
was all Monet. For those out there, for all you incels out there who are like, girls can't figure out electronics, she figured out all the electronics.
I don't know what that means, but it sounded kind of...
I don't know where that was going.
You know where that was going, Monet. That was saying that girls can do anything. Girls can do anything, and they can do... I mean, I will still continue to play at my computer and do funny things, but Monet nailed this. She really got the
shout out, Monet.
Shout out to Monet.
Thank you.
And
shout out to James Baker for joining us.
Hey man, I'm new to this.
Shout out to JP.
James is the every man on the street. He asked the questions that you were probably going to ask while you were driving your car and listening to this or watching your YouTube on the toilet.
I just love everything explained to me like a fifth grader.
I would say that was more like an eighth grader question.
Oh, thanks for graduation.
You graduated. You know that was an eighth grade question.
I'm smart.
All right. But thanks everybody.
Yes.
Thank y'all. Bye.
Bye.
As amended, the comprehensive zoning ordinance to amend and reordain Article 19 to establish a new interim zoning district to be named the customary lodging services staff and interim zoning district, the intent of which is to prohibit the acceptance of any applications for any license or permit for a hotel or motel which does not provide staffing at all hours as part of a customary lodging services.
Thank you. So you have some comments on this, Mr. Burnside, you're first.
I'm blessed to have a neighborhood newspaper, and I read it. It seems the Board of Zoning Adjustment has exercised its power and discretion in this matter. I think one of the many problems I have is the idea of employment somehow being separated from investment. So our governor has decided that, if my memory is to be trusted, ITEP is now much more about investment than it is about jobs. And I have difficulty with tax abatements that emphasize construction jobs when they disappear so quickly. I think that part of what we need here is a community that's realizing that jobs matter to the development of people, that people are children of God, and that they need to grow. And part of growth, of course, is to have a job for a while. And part of society contract is to provide job opportunities for people to explore different ways of growing. So here we have a hospitality industry, and we allegedly have a lot of people who receive jobs through that. And yet the driving force of capitalism and investment, of course, is to reduce the cost of everything, including your staffing. So with AI and robots and everything else coming online, the day's going to come when we don't have to work. And when that day comes, we're going to face really serious social problems about how do people grow. So I'm not saying we need make-work jobs, but I am saying that as we get rid of jobs, we need to figure out other ways for human beings to grow and participate in their society. And if we're not going to let them actually have STRs and we're not going to let them have jobs, I suppose we might have to let them have jail cells. Or I should say jail cells. Thank you.
Mr. Burnside, Mr. Smith. After Mr. Smith, we have Mr. Williams.
Good afternoon, Council. Zach Smith, 1000 South Norman C. Francis. I'm not here on any specific project, but want to say thank you for taking up this IZD. While I'm not sure what the full outcome may or may not be, I'm happy to see when the Council follows through with what the Council's responsibilities are, especially in light of continued inaccurate use and interpretation of non-written text by the Department of Safety and Permits. I know that politically, the Department has acted on this particular topic, has probably aligned with the Council, but if it was a different topic, if it was a different set of text that they were creating out of thin air, I do think this Council would be very quick to say, you've overstepped your bounds and you've done this. So I really appreciate the fact that this IZD, whether or not we agree with it, is actually going to be done, because as figured out and as determined, there was a, some people might call it a gap in the law, which is the law. You know, when there's something not written and people follow the law, it is the law that they're following. And people may not like that outcome, and I can appreciate and understand that. But at the end of the day, I'm just happy that the Council is taking the Council action and is going to actually overrule and override the Department of Safety and Permits and the administration from continuing to make up memos and make up language out of thin air, as they've been continuously doing specific to this topic. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Graham Williams, 1029 Barrack Street. So to emphasize what Mr. Smith just said, this IZD is only being proposed, I believe, because the Department of Safety and Permits can no longer enforce a law that never existed. This council just passed an ordinance that allows for these machine vending machines to be dropped in our neighborhoods that require no staffing. But the Department of Safety and Permits required staffing in hotels, despite the fact that the clear language of the law did not. As many of you know, I'm here on behalf of Saxony Management, LLC. As many of you know, my clients have invested hundreds of thousands of their retirement dollars into properties that this IZD would seek to shut down. I'm against the IZD, but I'm encouraged that the Council's attention is back on transient lodging, as until recently, the Department of Safety and Permits generally, and the zoning administration more specifically, has gotten into the business of inventing laws. I would encourage this Council to engage deeply in its oversight powers with respect to the Department of Safety and Permits. It is not the Department's job to pick winners and losers or to slow play applications, but rather to faithfully and equitably administer the law as it is written. As I stand here today, I have a hotel license that zoning will not issue because of a pretextual building permit. I have another that is hung up on the lobby requirement that the very proposal of this IZD admits does not currently exist. Pocket vetoes by City Hall should have been a relic of our pre-Katrina past. It's a shame that this became so contentious. We have tried to work with safety and permits on this issue. Our efforts have been met with refusals to meet, unanswered emails, and new violations appearing on One Stop, even as we wait in the lobby at One Stop. New Orleans has long been described as a market that is hostile to investment, and as a New Orleanian, I've never understood that. Allowing the Department of Safety and Permits to ignore its administrative duties and create laws that...
Thank you for your time. Anything that's interpreted in this move to override Safety and Permits memorandum, I think is probably an overreach, but my last comment on this would be FAFO.
Councilmember Morrell, there's one online comment.
Nope, add to the record. Okay. I'll vote. Move to adopt. Second by Councilmember Harris. Please vote your machines. 7 yeas, no nays, adopted.